Montana Territory. Autumn of 1883, the wind rolled low across the Bitterroot Valley, dragging the scent of pine and horse sweat through the open barn doors as Virginia Ellard stepped into the stables of the Hollow Creek Ranch with a pitchfork in one hand and a knot of old grief twisting in her chest. She had not come north for adventure or dreams. She had come for the money. 75 cents a day to muck stalls and keep her head down enough to feed her little brother back in Nebraska and maybe, eventually, bring him west. She had no time for cowboys, no patience for flirtation, and certainly no need for the kind of man who watched her from the corral fence like he already knew the shape of her soul. But he did. His name was Porter Hale, and he had the build of a man born to the saddle, broad shoulders, sun-dark skin, a quiet steadiness that made the ranch hands follow his lead without question. Virginia had seen his kind before, men who thought they could soften a woman's work with charm. But when she stepped into that barn, hair braided tight, boots caked in manure, Porter did not offer a joke or a wink. He only tipped his hat and said, "That's good work, Miss Ellard. The horses already trust you." She nodded once and kept on shoveling. By the third morning, her arms ached and her palms had blistered, but she did not complain. When the mare named Lily kicked at the stall wall and nearly caught her ribs, Virginia only pressed a hand to her side and exhaled slow. Porter was there before she could straighten. "You all right?" he asked. His voice was low but not soft, not pitying. "Fine." "You sure?" She met his eyes, then dark and steady, and nodded. "I do not break easy," he nodded back. "Neither do the good ones." That was the first time she smiled for real in weeks. That evening, as she rinsed her hands in the pump water behind the bunkhouse, she caught sight of him again. He was leading a sway-backed gelding toward the fence line, one hand on the reins, the other resting gentle against the animal's neck. He moved like he was listening to something no one else could hear. "Why are you still out here?" she asked before thinking. He looked back, surprised. "Horse is old, gets anxious at night. I walk him sometimes." She leaned against the pump, arms crossed. "You always this kind to everything?" "No," he said plainly. "Just to the ones that are scared." The words hit something inside her, something she had buried deep the day her father died and her mother left her with a promise she never kept. Virginia had not cried since she was 15. She would not start now, so she nodded once and turned away. The days got colder. Snow dusted the mountains. Virginia worked harder. She never asked for help, never lingered, never told anyone that she had once been a schoolteacher before the world took her home and left her with nothing but a pitchfork and a letter from her brother, Thomas, who still waited for her in a boarding house 3 towns over. Then came the morning. The storm rolled in hard from the west. Wind screamed through the barn rafters. Horses bucked and whinnied. Virginia had just stepped into Lily's stall when lightning cracked and the mare reared straight up. Her hooves caught the edge of the stall rail, and Virginia went down hard, her back striking the post. She could not breathe. A sharp pain shot through her side. For a moment she thought she might black out. Then strong arms were lifting her, careful, steady. She opened her eyes and saw him. "Porter," he looked furious. "Why in hell were you out here alone?" "Because it is my job," she said, gasping. He carried her to the tack room, laid her down on a bed of saddle blankets, and knelt beside her. "You are not supposed to get yourself killed for 75 cents. She tried to sit up. He stopped her with a hand on her shoulder, not rough, not soft, just there, solid and warm. "I am fine," she breathed. "No, you are not. You are hurt and you are stubborn," and he stopped, jaw clenched. "You do not have to do this alone." "I have been doing it alone for a long time." "I know," he said. "I saw it the first day, the way you hold your breath when someone's kind to you, like it might be a trick." She stared at him, chest tight. "Why do you care?" He looked straight at her. No smile. No bluff, just truth. Because I have been waiting for you, her throat caught. You do not even know me. I have known your kind my whole life, the quiet ones, the strong ones, the ones who do not ask for anything they need. You are the only woman I ever waited for, Virginia. Something inside her cracked wide open. She did not kiss him, not then. But her hand came up and curled around his wrist, and he did not pull away. Later, after the storm broke, she stood at the barn door and watched the sky clear. Porter stood beside her, close but not touching. "My brother," she said finally. "His name is Thomas. He is 10. He is waiting for me in Missoula. I have been sending what I can," he nodded. "We will bring him here," she blinked. I meant what I said." She looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time in years, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she did not have to keep walking alone. When she reached for his hand, he took it without hesitation. His grip was sure, warm, like home. By late October, the ground had hardened under a crust of frost, and the sky hung close and gray, pressing down on the valley like a held breath. The herd had been driven down from the higher meadows, and the days shortened fast, dusk rolling in before supper. Virginia had started wrapping her hands in strips of linen at night, the old bruising along her ribs fading to a dull ache that only caught when she twisted too quick. She didn't ask for lighter duty, and Porter never offered. But every morning now there were fresh flakes of oats waiting by Lily's stall and the water buckets already hauled in from the creek. He never said it was him. He didn't need to. One evening, she found him in the shed behind the main barn, fitting new shoes to a colt that wouldn't stand still. The iron rasp rasped slow, steady across the hoof. Sparks flew from the forge as he worked. "You've got quiet hands," she said. He glanced up, a streak of soot across his cheekbone. "Colt's been handled rough before. He don't trust easy. Neither do I." He didn't smile. Just set down the rasp and stepped back so the colt could settle again. "You get word from your brother?" he asked. "Letter came 2 days ago," she said, pulling the folded paper from the pocket of her skirt. "He's been helping sweep floors at the chapel near the depot. Says the minister's wife gives him bread when there's extra." Porter didn't touch the letter. "He ready to come?" He's scared. "Doesn't say it, but I can tell. He'll be safer here." She leaned against the shed post, watching him pack away the worn tools. "I don't even know if he remembers the sound of my voice. It's been near 2 years." Porter straightened, his back casting a long shadow in the lantern light. Then it's time he heard it again. The next morning, she rode out with him for the first time, the two of them moving along the perimeter fence, checking where the wire had sagged in the last windstorm. He handed her wire cutters without a word. She didn't ask how he knew she'd done this sort of work before. They worked until the sun was high, coats unbuttoned as the cold broke. When they stopped near the creek to water the horses, Porter knelt at the edge and splashed his face, then sat back on his heels and looked up at her. "You're leaving something out," he said. Virginia looped the reins and sat on a flat rock. "I lied to him when I left, told him I had a teaching post in Helena, that I'd send for him once the schoolhouse was built." Why lie? Because he was already scared. "I didn't want him thinking I was going somewhere I'd be sleeping in hay and scrubbing troughs." He didn't answer right away. Then, "You could still teach if you wanted." She looked over at him. "And who'd taken a woman who hasn't held chalk in years? Who smells like horse and has a scar on her side that still throbs when it rains?" "I would," he said. She stared at him. "You're not making sense." He plucked a blade of grass and twisted it between his fingers. "I've got land out past the ridge. Not much, but enough for a cabin and maybe a garden. I've been building it slow. Figured I'd finish before winter closed the pass. You never said. I was waiting to see if I'd have someone to build it for." She stood then, the wind catching the edge of her coat. You don't owe me anything, Porter. I know that. Then why tell me this? He looked up at her, eyes steady. Because I want you there, and I want the boy there too, not because I pity you, because I see you. You work like the world's still watching. You hold your breath when you walk into a room, and you still show up every single morning. She was quiet a long time. The creek whispered over stone. A hawk circled overhead. Then she said, "If I write him today, I could have him here by the second week of November." "That's if the weather holds." He nodded once. "I'll ride with you to fetch him." She didn't speak again until they were halfway back to the ranch, the horses walking slow along the ridge. "I've never had a man offer me anything I didn't have to earn twice over." "I'm not offering," he said. "I'm asking." She didn't answer then, but she didn't let go of the reins when his hand brushed hers. And that night, when she set the letter out to dry by the stove, she wrote something she hadn't written in years, coming soon. "There's someone here I want you to meet." The train from Missoula arrived 2 days before the snow set in for good, wheels groaning as they dragged to a halt at the small station west of Darby. Porter held the reins of the wagon while Virginia stepped onto the platform, her gloves worn thin at the fingertips, her breath visible in the cold. Thomas stood beside the station master, shoulders drawn tight beneath a wool coat 2 sizes too big. He clutched a canvas satchel in one hand and a folded blanket in the other. His face was thinner than she remembered, still boyish, but guarded. His eyes searched the platform until they landed on her. He didn't run to her. He blinked once like he didn't believe she was real. Virginia walked to him slow, boots crunching over gravel. When she reached him, she crouched so they were eye level. "You've grown," she said. Thomas's voice was hoarse from the train ride. "You really built a place?" "Not yet, but there's land, and there's someone waiting." He looked past her then toward the wagon where Porter stood with one foot braced on the wheel spoke. He didn't wave, just nodded. Thomas frowned. "That him?" Virginia stood. "That's him." They rode back through the forested pass, the wagon creaking under the weight of supplies and the boy's silence. Porter didn't press him. He kept the horses steady, letting Virginia speak when she could. She told Thomas about the creek that never froze over, the owl that nested in the rafters, the way Lily had taken to her like she belonged. When they reached the ranch, Thomas hesitated before stepping down. Virginia climbed out first, holding a hand behind her. He stared at it a long time before taking it. Inside the bunkhouse, Porter had cleared the cot nearest the stove, laid out a folded quilt, and left a chipped ceramic cup filled with warm cider on the stool beside it. No words, no gesture for praise. Just there, waiting. That night, Thomas curled under the blanket without protest. Virginia sat near the stove, boots off, listening to the wind press against the walls. Porter leaned beside the doorframe, arms crossed, face unreadable. "He's afraid he'll be sent off again," she said quietly. Porter didn't look over. "Then he needs to see we don't do that here." She stood, brushing ash from her skirt. "You ever think about having a family?" His gaze stayed on the window. "I used to. Then I figured it wasn't in the cards. Land's quiet, but it'll wear you down if you've got no one to talk to but your own shadow." She stepped beside him, her shoulder brushing his arm. "You're a good man, Porter." He turned to her then. "You don't owe me anything." "I know." She touched his hand, the one resting against the doorframe. "But I want this. You, him, the land, all of it." He didn't speak, just turned his hand under hers and held it. Before dawn, she rose to start the morning fire. Thomas was already awake, his boots laced, sitting on his cot with the cup still warm between his palms. "I dreamed about Ma," he said, eyes on the flame. "But you were there instead." Virginia knelt and added another log. "She's not coming back. I know, I just thought maybe now you don't have to leave anymore." "I don't," she said. "This is where we stay." That afternoon, Porter took Thomas out to the paddock. They didn't speak much, but Virginia watched from the fence as he handed the boy a brush and showed him how to move slow and light over the mare's flank. Thomas didn't flinch when the horse shifted. He just steadied himself, lips pressed tight, and kept brushing. By week's end, the snow came heavy. Virginia moved her things into the cabin. Porter had been building unfinished walls. A stove not yet piped, but enough shelter to start shaping into something real. She brought Thomas's satchel, her few dresses, and a small tin of dried sage she'd kept since Nebraska. Porter carried in the last of the firewood and set it in the corner beside the hearth. "It'll hold," he said, "long as we stay ahead of the wind." Virginia turned from the window. "I'd like to hang a slate up near the front beam. Teach Thomas here and maybe the neighbor boys once the thaw comes." Porter looked at the bare wall. "Be good to hear voices in here." She stepped close, hands sliding around his waist, face tucked beneath his chin. "There'll be plenty of that. And laughter. And morning bread. I've made do without, but I don't want any more." He kissed her then, gentle, sure, like he'd been waiting for the right moment and knew this was it. When they pulled apart, her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. Outside, the snow fell thick and soft, blanketing the valley in silence. Inside, the fire caught, and the room began to warm. By late November, the snow lay thick enough to muffle hoofbeats, and the cabin stood tight against the cold. Porter had finished chinking the walls with moss and clay, and smoke now curled steady from the chimney. Inside, the days fell into quiet rhythm meals cooked over the hearth. Thomas tracing letters on a slate while Virginia read aloud from a Bible she'd salvaged years ago, and Porter working the land with a patience that steadied everything around him. One morning, Virginia came in from gathering kindling with the scent of pine clinging to her sleeves and a flush in her cheeks. She set the bundle near the hearth and turned to find Porter kneeling by a wooden crate in the corner, lifting out pieces of something wrapped in canvas. "What's that?" she asked, brushing snow from her shoulders. He glanced up. "Rifle stock I carved last winter, thought I'd finish it before spring." Her brow lifted. "You carve, used to, haven't had much reason to lately." She stepped closer, crouching beside him. The wood was dark, smooth under her fingertips. A carving knife lay beside it, the handle worn from use. "What made you start again?" He looked at her, quiet. "You did." She didn't answer at first. Then, "I never knew how to be taken care of, not really." "You don't have to know how. You just have to let it happen." Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the distant call of a crow. Virginia stood and crossed to the stove, stirring the pot that had begun to simmer. The scent of onion and venison filled the room. Behind her, Thomas appeared in the doorway, boots damp and hair windblown. "There's a man at the fence," he said. "He's got a mule loaded with sacks." Porter was already reaching for his coat. "Stay inside," he told them. Virginia nodded, her hand resting briefly on Thomas's shoulder as Porter stepped outside. Through the frost-framed window, she watched him speak to the man, a lean figure with a wool scarf pulled high and a worn satchel slung over one shoulder. After a moment, Porter gestured toward the barn and the man followed him out of sight. "He didn't look like a ranch hand," Thomas said, watching her face. "No," Virginia said, eyes still on the window, "but not everyone who comes through is looking for pasture." Later, Porter returned with 2 sacks of dried apples and a letter folded into quarters. "He's passing through to Butt," Porter said, setting the goods on the table. "Said he picked this up with the post last week. Thought it might belong to someone here." Virginia unfolded the letter slowly. Her eyes skimmed the page, and her fingers tightened just once at the words written in a looping hand she hadn't seen since before the war. "It's from my uncle," she said, voice steady. "I didn't know he was still alive." Thomas looked up from the slate. "What does he want?" "He says he's remarried, settled near Fort Benton." He's heard of a woman working near the Bitterroot who matches my mother's description. Her fingers rested on the edge of the table. He thinks I might be her daughter. You gonna write him back? Porter asked. She folded the letter again, slower this time. I think I will. But only to say I'm not the same girl he might remember, and I have no interest in becoming his responsibility. Porter didn't press. He only reached for the carving again, his thumb moving over the grain. That night, once Thomas had gone to bed, Virginia stepped out onto the porch, the sky above brushed with stars and the cold biting through her shawl. Porter joined her a moment later, handing her a tin mug of cider. She took it, warming her hands. You ever think about leaving? He leaned against the post. Not since I found something worth staying for. She looked up at him. You mean the land? No, he said. I mean you. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of breath and warmth and the kind of knowing that didn't need words. She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. I never thought I'd find this. Not out here, not like this. He let go of the post and turned to face her fully. I meant it, about waiting. I didn't know what I was waiting for until you came through that barn door. Her breath caught on the cold air. And now I don't want to go a day without seeing your eyes first thing in the morning. She stepped closer, her forehead resting against his. Then don't. He kissed her there, slow and certain, and when they went back inside, the fire hadn't gone out. The warmth had only grown. By mid-December, the cabin had settled into itself. The walls no longer sighed in the wind, and the roof held firm even under the weight of new snow. Porter had finished the chimney stonework with his own hands, and Virginia had sewn thick curtains from wool remnants to keep the warmth inside. The days were shorter now, but not empty. Never empty. One morning, Virginia found Thomas sitting cross-legged by the fire with a strip of rawhide stretched between his fingers. He was threading it through a piece of pine, tongue between his teeth in concentration. Where'd you learn that? She asked, kneeling beside him. Porter showed me, he said, not looking up. Said every boy ought to know how to make something with his hands. She brushed an ash fleck off his shoulder. He's right. Can I give it to him when I'm done? I think he'd like that very much. Later that day, she walked out to the edge of the ridge where the trees thinned and the valley opened wide. Porter was there, mending a gate that had started leaning inward from frost heave. He looked up when she approached, resting one gloved hand on the post. Gate's near gone, he said. Might need to saw a new beam come spring. She stood beside him, the cold rising through her boots. Thomas made you something. Porter brushed a splinter from his sleeve. He talks more now. He laughs too, she said. Soft, like he doesn't quite trust the sound yet. He gave a slow nod. He's coming into himself. She stepped closer, her voice low. You've given him that. You gave him the ground to grow on, he said. I just helped him find his footing. She slipped her arm through his. You ever think about what we want to build here? Not just the cabin, all of it. Every day, he said. I think about planting beans and barley, maybe some apple trees down by the slope. I think about a bench by the door, and you sitting on it come summer, reading while Thomas runs the fence line. I'd like that, she murmured. I'd like to put roots down so deep nothing could shake them loose. He turned to her then, his face open in the gray light. I want to marry you, Virginia, her breath caught. I don't need a preacher's words to know what you are to me, he continued, but I'd like to say them anyway, so the world knows I'm yours. She didn't speak right away. Her eyes shimmered not with uncertainty but with awe, quiet and full. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'd marry you today if there were someone to witness it. He reached into his coat pocket and drew out a thin band of braided silver. It was my mother's, he said. She wore it until the day she passed. Said it was the only thing that ever fit her hand and her heart at once. Virginia took the ring with trembling fingers. Then I will wear it with honor." They married 3 days later in the front room of the cabin, with the ranch foreman and his wife standing as witnesses and Thomas holding a string of dried pine cones in place of flowers. The snow had paused that morning, and the sun broke through just long enough to lay a golden path across the floorboards. Porter wore his cleanest shirt, and Virginia had let down her hair, the braid resting over one shoulder. After, they shared bread and smoked trout, and Thomas played a tune on a carved whistle Porter had shaped from willow. No grand speeches, no promises shouted into the wind, just simple vows spoken from the heart, and hands held tight through it all. The rest of the winter passed with a kind of quiet joy. Virginia began lessons again, this time at the long table Porter had built by hand. Thomas learned letters and numbers, but also how to read the sky for weather, how to split kindling without bruising the wood, how to speak with confidence and listen with care. In spring, they planted potatoes and beans, and Porter carved a small plaque for the cabin door, etched with the word Ellard, not to claim her, but to honor all she'd brought with her. They built a coop behind the barn, and Virginia traded sewing work for a few hens and a rooster. Laughter came easier now, and so did sleep. One night, as they watched the stars rise from the porch, Virginia leaned into Porter's side, her head on his shoulder. "You changed everything," she said softly. He shook his head. "You made it worth changing." She pressed a kiss to the curve of his jaw. "I didn't know love could feel like this, like a place to rest." "Then stay," he said. "As long as there's breath in my body, you've got a place here." And she did. Years passed and the cabin grew. A second room was added for Thomas, who took to ranching with a sense of pride that made Porter quietly proud. Virginia taught a handful of neighbor children in the warmer months, her voice steady as she led them through scripture and psalms. Porter tended the land with hands that shaped not only fences but a life that held firm through storms and seasons. They aged, but slowly and with grace. Their days were full, not of grand gestures but of steady love, a shared glance across a supper table, a hand brushing dust from a shoulder. A quiet moment beneath the cottonwoods where no words were needed. Virginia had once thought the world had taken everything from her. But out there, in the curve of the Bitterroot Valley, she found it had only been waiting for her to come home, and with Porter she did. For good.